Welcome everyone, and let's get started. So thanks for participating in the session today. So in this session, we are going to talk about how to get your data into Apache Pinot faster with StarTree's Data Manager. So my name is Seunghyun. I'm a software engineer at StarTree. I primarily work on Data Manager and data ingestion for Pinot. And one interesting fact about me is that I recently started to drink wine as a hobby. And then I found out that Pinot Noir is my most favorite wine. And then I have been working on Pinot for the past 6 years, so I find a lot of connections to Pinot. So today I'm joined by Team Santos, my coworker.
Hi everyone, my name is Tim, and I also work on Data Manager at StarTree and Pinot Data Ingestion. And one interesting fact about me is in my past life, I used to be into hip-hop dancing. So that's where that picture where I look pretty intense is from. And I used to compete in various hip-hop Bay Area shows. And yeah, that's about it.
All right, thanks.
I'll let you take it away, Seunghyun.
Yeah, so our talk today is divided into 4 different sections. So initially, we are going to discuss a little bit about the current Pinot table creation process and how it can be challenging to you guys. And then we're going to introduce the data manager. And we're going to discuss how the data manager was built and how it can benefit you guys. And we're going to do the live demo. And we're going to wrap up this talk by sharing some challenges that we have faced and future improvements that we would like to make. So this is the second day of the conference. So I hope that everyone at least heard about Apache Pinot. So, so Apache Pinot is originally started from LinkedIn, and then this quickly became de facto solution for site-facing user analytics use cases. So I took the screenshot of the who viewed my profile from the LinkedIn. So if you, as you can see on the left side, this provides some analytics report on your profile viewers. So all these counts are updated in real-time manner, so data is very fresh. And then it also, you can also drill down into different companies, industries, or locations. So if you load this page, it's going to hit the Pinot under the hood. And this was actually the first site-facing use case at LinkedIn that we started. And then since then, the Pinot community has grown very tremendously. And then here we are now. So Apache Pinot in high level, it's a lab data store. And then it's based on the columnar storage format. And we provide a lot of different index techniques to choose based on your use case. And then it provides the low latency analytics over fresh data. And it is fully distributed system, so it's highly available, reliable, and scalable. And it provides the SQL interface for slicing and dicing over your data. And it also provides the, so it is based on the Lambda architecture, so it allows you to ingest data from both and batch streaming sources. So traditionally, Pinot table creation process involves in 3 different steps. So you need to first define your schema, and you need to define your table configuration, and you need to use REST APIs or Pinot admin scripts to create your table and start your data ingestion. So let's look a little bit closer for each steps. So first, you need to define your schema. So you need to, for the schema, you need to define dimensions and metrics. So dimensions are the columns that represent some characteristics for a particular row. And then metrics are usually the measurement. So people usually filter and group by based on the dimensions. And people usually run aggregation functions over the metric columns. So you first need to define the column is whether dimension and metrics. And then you need to define data types. And Pinot also treats the time column as the first class citizen. So you also need to specify the time columns and its format as well. So the right side of the example is the sample Pinot schema. So it looks pretty fine if you are just configuring few columns. But if you need to define tens of columns or even hundreds of columns, then this process can be pretty tedious. So once you define your schema, the next step that you need to do is to coming up with the Pinot table config. And I think this process will be much, much more complex because there are so many things that you need to configure. So first, you need to define indexing strategy based on your use case. And you need to configure the ingestion configurations, tenants, routing, and so much more. So Pinot table and schema set provides you the maximum flexibility. So you can configure all the feature set that is provided Pinot. But at the same time, while you're building these two configurations, a lot of things can go wrong. So someone may make some mistakes and put some invalid schema, and someone may put some wrong credentials, incorrect column types or format, or incorrect syntax errors. And then someone may also put some incompatible configurations. So this process may be working for experienced Pinot users, but it can be very intimidating for the first-time Apache Pinot users. And they need to go through multiple iterations of troubleshooting cycles. And they would also need to go to the documentation, read about it, understand the concepts, and find some examples, and then apply back to their schema and table configurations. So from our prior experience, this end-to-end step can take multiple days. And this can actually be the developer productivity hit. So we would like to introduce Data Manager, StarTree's solution to make Pinot data ingestion very easy and simple. So before we get into the details, we first want to discuss what kind of information that we need to collect from users when we're setting up the ingestion pipeline. So we have divided those inputs into 3 different categories. So first category is about the connection. So when you need to access the data source, you need to set up the access. So we need to get some access credentials from the users. So for example, if you're using S3 on the AWS, you might need to get the secret key and access key pair from the users so that you can go to the S3 bucket and download some object. And then the second category is about the data reader. And this is about how to understand and read the data source. So assuming that we establish the connection to S3 bucket, and we can download the object files, but we still need to know about the information on how to parse those data. So for instance, sometimes the data can be written as Avro or Parquet files. So we need to know about those information. And we also need to know about the schema for the source so that we can read all the fields that the underlying data contains. And then the last piece of the input will be the field mapping. So this is about how to map the source data to the destination Pinot table. So sometimes people may want to add some derived columns. They may want to drop some columns, or they may want to apply some transformation functions, or they want to make some changes for their time columns. So in high level, Data Manager will take those 3 inputs: connection, data reader, and field mapping. And then with those, Data Manager, we're going to set up the Pinot table and schema in the Pinot cluster. And at the same time, it's also going to set up the ingestion workflow. So once you go through the Data Manager steps, then Pinot table will be ready for production. And then the data will start to flow into the Pinot table. So in order to make this end-to-end process very easy and simple, Data Manager provides a lot of different features. So these are including intuitive UI and UX. And Data Manager provides validation in all steps. And Data Manager is doing the schema and table inference for data modeling and index and advanced config steps. And it also provides to establish the connection to multiple different connections. And then it also provides the metrics and diagnostics feature so that people can get the ingestion status after the ingestion workflow is set up. So let's deep dive into each features of the Data Manager. So first feature that we would like to highlight is the intuitive UI and UX. So Data Manager actually abstracts away all these complex Pinot concepts. And then it provides the predefined user flow that can guide users with even no prior knowledge of Pinot. So we have 5 different steps. If you follow these steps properly, then you will be able to create the Pinot table and schema without much trouble. Also, we recently revamped our user experience by launching the new UI. So on the left side is the old UI, and then the right side is the new UI. So now the data manager has very similar look as other StarTree products. And then I think the look is much better than the previous one. And then, so we also added the separation of connection and table creation. And we also enhanced the StarTree index creation process and so on. So and other than this, we also made a lot of improvements based on the customer feedbacks. So the user input in Data Manager will be validated at each step of the dataset creation process. So this reduces chances of any syntax or semantic errors. And Data Manager will also provide the feedback on the UI so that the users can get those feedback and then they can correct their inputs. And another benefit of using Data Manager is being able to preview what your Pinot data look like before starting the ingestion. So in this example, we are trying to add a derived column, and then you're trying to apply the JSON path transformation function to extract some state field from the JSON formatted column. So as you can see, Data Manager will provide the preview in multiple steps so that you can build the confidence that your data will be correctly ingested even before you actually run the ingestion pipeline. So, so the schema and table config inference is actually the game-changing feature for the Data Manager. And then this is where all the magic happens in the Data Manager. So on the left, we can see the sample rows of data that will be ingested to Pinot. And on the right side is the schema that is automatically generated by the Data Manager. So if we take a little bit closer look, the types are inferred correctly. And then we usually take the source schema, and then we have a translation layer that translates the source schema into Pinot schema. But in case of that, there can be some cases where we don't have the access to the source schema. So in that case, we take the samples and then we directly infer the schema out of those samples. So the time column is also the first class citizen in the Pinot. So the Data Manager will also try to detect the time columns and then also infer the time formats. So in this example, we have the date column, and then it's in ISO format. And then as you can see on the right side, the date column was correctly inferred as date time field on the Pinot side, and then the time format was also correctly inferred. So one key strength of Pinot that I would like to highlight is that Pinot actually comes with a lot of different indexing strategies. And then you can choose index based on your use case. But I think that the direct downside of that is that users will have to pick which one to use. And then this can be pretty intimidating for the first-time users as well. So Data Manager will make this process simple and easy as well. So the Data Manager will recommend the encoding and indexing configurations. So in this example, we have 3 different columns. And then they are based on the dimension field type. And then they also have the data type as string. And then Data Manager recommended the variable length dictionary as an encoding strategy. And then it also recommended inverted index for the indexing setup. So if you think about it, then this really makes sense because for string columns, usually the values are in variable lengths. So if you use fixed sized dictionary, then you'll have to pick the maximum size of that list of rows, and then you'll have to use that as a fixed size. So that means that you will have to fill a lot of paddings, and then that will waste a lot of storage. So for string columns, we usually recommend people to use variable length dictionary. And for the indexing recommendation, inverted index also makes sense because for dimension columns, people tend to perform a lot of filters, and then inverted index will help you to expedite the performance for the filtering phase. And in advanced configuration setup, one feature that we would like to highlight is the StarTree configuration. So the StarTree is very advanced indexing techniques available in Pinot. And StarTree index will use the raw data as well as the pre-aggregated data in a smart way to achieve low query latencies but it tries to use the storage space very efficiently. So for data manager, we provide very intuitive user interface for configuring StarTree index, and this makes easy for users to unlock the power of Pinot very without much like deep understanding of the StarTree index. So the next feature is about the ingestion customization, and from here, Tim will take over the talk. Thank you.
Thank you, Seunghyun. So in Data Manager, we wanted to make it very easy to ingest your data from wherever it might live. So we have various connectors, which where we are able to ingest from your various sources. So one category would be batch, and you can think of this as your S3 or your GCS. We also support ingesting from your streaming sources. This includes Kafka, Confluent, or Kinesis. And we also have support for ingesting from your data warehouse. And so this ingestion happens through JDBC and issuing SQL queries. And so we support ingesting from BigQuery as well as Snowflake. And soon we do have a write API coming. And this allows you the ability to insert records directly into Pinot via API call. So to go a little bit deeper into the implementation of when we do need to add a new connector, we have an interface called the Data Source Explorer interface that needs to be implemented whenever we add a new one. And there are three main functionalities or methods that we implement when we add a new connector. So the first one is the test connection. And test connection is self-explanatory. We want to make sure you're able to establish a connection using your credentials to the data source you want to ingest data from. The next method is the explore source. So exploring source is how you locate your data within your data source. So you can think of this as, for Kafka, these are your Kafka topics. For S3, these could be your common prefixes or directories. Essentially, how do you find the data within the source to ingest? And finally, you would want to implement the logic for extracting the source data from wherever it might live. For every source, they always have a different client that we need to use. So for S3, we have the S3 Java client. And we need to make sure we're able to extract data from that source to provide the data preview. And in the case of formats like Avro or Parquet, we're able to download the source schema as well, because that helps us do the Pinot schema inference. And the rest of the code path is pretty similar across the connectors after that. This includes the Pinot schema inference and the index recommendation and the Pinot config inference that Seunghyun mentioned earlier. So what happens after Data Manager? There's a lot more to the Pinot ingestion story after Data Manager. Data Manager is great. It helps you form your schema, it helps you form your table config. But then after that, it kicks off the process and it's in Pinot's hands, right? So as you can see here, there are multiple components. Our colleagues gave a talk about this yesterday, all about Pinot minion ingestion. But to kind of go over in a high level, we have our task generator that will schedule the job based on the ingestion task config. Pinot minion will pick up the task, then it will start ingesting the data and generate the Pinot segments. Then from there, the servers will eventually get the Pinot segments and serve your data. So as you can see here, multiple components outside of the data manager realm. And so it's possible that an error could happen at any point of this process. And typically you would have to go into, say, the Pinot controller or the Pinot minion or Pinot server, comb through the logs to see what's happening. But in Data Manager, we provide some metrics and some diagnostics to help users understand what is happening with their data set after they kick off the ingestion. So here's a screenshot of what you'll see in Data Manager. And as you can see, we have one red dot and a bunch of green dots. The red dot is bad. And it kind of allows you to quickly see what's happening with your data set, if it's in a healthy state or if it's in a bad state. So when you click into, say, like the data set with the red dot, you'll see a stack trace, and you'll see that this is bubbled up, and you'll see what is actually happening. And I believe this might have come from the Pinot minion component. And so without the user having to dig in through the logs, we're able to kind of surface this so that the user is able to triage from there. So let's go into a live demo. So you can see here, this is Data Manager, the new and improved UI that we recently released. And as you can see here, we have a list of data sets or Pinot tables that we recently created. And down here, we have our connections. And this is a concept within Data Manager in which we persist any kind of information you say, any information about a connection to a data source. So a user can kind of just pick up where they left off and say, oh, I already created this connection with S3. Let's go ahead and create a table using it. So for this demo, let's go ahead and create a data set. You can see all the different connection types that we support. We have our event streams. We have our cloud object stores. We have our JDBC ingestion-related connections here for the cloud data warehouses, and we also support uploading a file. So let's go ahead and create a S3 data set. You can see here that this will show you forms related to how you're establishing your connection with S3. We support different types of authentication methods, as you can see here. For this demo, let's go ahead and just reuse an existing connection that I created earlier. So let's use RTA Summit 2023. Hit next. Now let's start with the name. Call this RTA demo. You can add a description if you would like. And let's ingest our GitHub's event data. So pull request, merge events, JSON. So this is just a list of the common prefixes or the directories within the S3 bucket. We know that this data is in JSON format. And you also have the ability to specify a inclusion pattern or a file exclusion pattern if you want to exclude some files from ingestion. So we can go ahead and check out our sample data. So this is some of the new functionality that we added in the UI, in which at every step of the process, we want the user to be confident that they know what they're going to be ingesting into Pinot. And so here, we're able to provide a user a sneak peek of what data they're going to be ingesting. So I'm going to scroll through here. Looks pretty good. I think I pointed to the right directory, and so we'll hit next. Now we are taken to the data modeling section, or the data modeling step of Data Manager. And listed here are the columns. These correspond to the Pinot columns and the Pinot schema that we inferred. And this was done through sampling the data and also looking at the input schema. And from here, let's say we want, we're not really interested in committers. So let's go ahead and delete that column. Yes, I am sure. And you also have the ability to, say, change your field type. You can change your data type as well. And for this data set, I know we only have our time in created time millis, but I do want to express the date column, let's say, in a standard date format. So in year, month, and day. So let's go ahead and add a new column for that. Oops. We'll call this new date column. And then this is going to be a date time field type in Pinot. This will be represented as string, ISO. Just want it in year, month, day. So let's go ahead and delete the rest of this. Looks good. And then let's add our mapping function. So the mapping function we would use is to date time, created time millis. And then the format is year, month, day. And let's go see if this works. And this, if I typed this in correctly. I did. So here is an example. We want to show the users, as I mentioned earlier, kind of validation throughout the entire process. So this is an example of some of the input from the created time millis column and how it's being transformed into the new column that we created in Pinot. So this looks good. So we're going to go ahead and create this column. And as Seunghyun mentioned, behind the scenes, we're forming the Pinot table configuration and we're forming the Pinot schema. And so what we can do is we can actually take a look at the Pinot schema that we are generating by interacting with this UI. So as you can see here, we have the new date time column that I added. And then you scroll down, this is the transformation function. And so that looks good. And we can also take a look at the preview. So we can also see what the data is going to look like when it ends up in Pinot. And we should have our new column somewhere here. Yep. So everything looks good. And we added our new column. So let's go ahead and close this. You also have the ability to select if you want to create a dimension table within Pinot. But for this, we're creating a standard table. And for the time column, let's go ahead and use the new one that we created. Because the time column or time is a first-class citizen within Pinot, we need to make sure that we specify it. So we'll hit next. Now we are in the index and additional configuration step of Data Manager. And as you can see here, these are the encodings and indexing that we recommended from Data Manager based on the input data type. And so this looks pretty good. I don't think we need to change anything here. But let's go ahead and add a StarTree index because that's an index that we hold close and dear to our heart here at StarTree. So let's create one. Let's go organization for the dimension split. And let's also do a repository. And let's say we want, let's say, some of num lines added, and then we can add another one on, say, number of comments, maybe average. We'll keep the sum as well. So we'll go ahead and create this index. Awesome. You can see here that there was a validation on the table config. So whenever we're editing the table configuration, we're making sure that the table config is valid. And let's say we want our retention to increase to 360 days. We can do that. And like the previous screen, we can do a preview of what we're creating behind the scenes in Data Manager. And so here's the table configuration. You can see that the retention time value is reflecting correctly as 360 days, and we should see our StarTree index that we created. And so instead of having to manually type this up, refer to documentation, we kind of just take care of it for you. So this is awesome. So let's go ahead and click out of this. We'll go to our last screen. This is kind of our review and submit screen. So you get to see what the data is going to look like, the schema that was created, the table config that was created. This is a read-only view. So if you do need to make some changes, you can hit back. But this looks pretty good. And so we'll go ahead and create our data set. And you can see here we have our ingestion status. So far, our ingestion is healthy. Progress is at 0% right now because we just kicked it off. But we can go ahead and navigate back. And we'll see that RTA demo is one of our recently created data sets. And let's see if Pinot has ingested our data. So we can click on Query Console. Right now, we are leveraging the open source Query Console, but we are planning on having a StarTree version of this. And we'll have our RTA demo. Great. Looks like we have data. So everything worked as planned. And so that's it for this demo. Let's just go back. So I'd like to talk about some of the challenges that we faced when building out Data Manager and having it as a product. So today is April 26th, and these all represent April 26th. And as you saw earlier, that we need to provide the time format when specifying it, when specifying a time column in Pinot. And so we don't want the user to kind of have to look through documentation, Google, what date time format is this in. We want to make sure this is happening all behind the scenes in Data Manager. So we need to make sure all of these are inferred correctly. And this is just an example of a CSV file. This is also the contents of a CSV file. This is also a CSV file, just different delimiters. And this is also a CSV file. This one has no headers. So in Data Manager, we need to make sure we're able to support all of these different types of variations. And we need to make sure that we provide the configuration to the user in case they need to specify some edge cases with their data. And at the end of the day, we want to get your data into Pinot faster than ever. And so that's why we want to make this process as seamless as possible. Some other challenges that we faced was trying to add support for the various authentication methods. For every type of ingestion source, there are different ways in which you can authenticate. So for S3, there's adding the access key and secret key, using IAM role to authenticate, and with Kafka, there's a whole bunch as well. And so we need to make sure that we're flexible and we support the numerous ways of authenticating to every source. And we need to make sure it's well tested and also very user-friendly. And so this clip art I found is actually, if you go on Google Images and you just search dirty data, that's what you get. And so that's kind of how we feel like sometimes when we get a bug or we hear of some ingestion-related issue. Working with dirty data is expected. It's going to happen. Users are going to have data stored in every shape, way, and form. And so we need to make sure we build a robust engine, a robust ingestion pipeline to make sure that they can get their data into Pinot. We have run into scalability issues. We've seen that files can be too big. There can be too many files that are small in size. But data managers should be able to set the optimal Pinot configs to ensure that the ingestion happens smoothly. So this is everything that we're trying to do behind the scenes. And another thing that we learned is it's important that we have a quick feedback and development cycle. We're going to get more use cases. We're going to learn about more ways in which people want to use Pinot. So it's important that we're able to quickly update our application and release it to our users. So to talk about some future improvements, we want to add a lot more connectors, support for all the major cloud object stores, all the data lake management systems, so like Delta Lake, Iceberg, Apache Hudi, and then as well as CDC support via Debezium. And I talked about Write API a little bit earlier. We also want to improve our transformation functions. As you saw in the demo, I had to type in the to-date time conversion, but we want to make this a lot easier for our users. So we do want to support registering your functions as well as some kind of code completion so that users don't have to cross-reference with the documentation. We also want to improve our null handling, our error messaging, support for data flattening, and we also want to add audit logs and RBAC functionality in the future. And so this concludes our presentation. Thank you all for listening. And if you want to try out Data Manager, visit StarTree.ai, and we'll help you get set up. So thank you very much, and then we'll take any questions.
Raise your hand if you have a question.
Thanks for the talk. I'm curious, how granular are your status updates on the ingestion flow, and how exactly are you doing the status updates? Is there something polling different components of Pinot?
Yeah, so we are, there is a kind of like a minion ingestion status that is persisted in ZK.
Yeah.
And so we have an endpoint in Pinot for retrieving that. And so right now, yeah, it's typically when the data set details are loaded, we're able to fetch that information.
Yeah, so to add a little bit on top of that, we are pulling the task level information. So we know how many tasks are completed and how many are not, how many are in progress, and we get those information. Yeah.
Thanks for the talk. Hi, I'm Leon. I'm actually a data manager user from justthetakeaway.com. And I really like the schema inference because I always hated to actually write down the schema of a table. So that's actually great. But I guess there's indeed some challenge, and you already touched upon it, on suggesting the indexes, right? Because you're not familiar with the actual use case of a table. Can you elaborate a bit more on, are there plans to maybe ask the user of what use cases they are going to have on the table, or are there plans on working on that?
Yeah, so I think right now our index recommendation is mostly based on the limited information that we get from the data manager, right? So as we improve this product a little bit more, if we want to do more advanced recommendation, then I think that needs to be happen after we start to ingest the data. So once we have the data, then we will know about the cardinality information of each columns. And then if we get the real queries, then we will also have a lot of more information about what are the types of the queries that we are processing. So once we have those information, I think we in the future we want to build the recommendation like pipeline that collects all the data from the Pinot cluster, and then we make the new recommendation after we start the ingestion plus like start to serve the actual queries. Yeah, so we want to improve that way. Yeah.
That's a great idea, thanks. I have one more question, if you don't mind. I guess ingesting from files is okay because you know whether a file is new, so what segments you need to update, for example, or what files are added. But I guess syncing data from databases like BigQuery, Snowflake, it's a bit more tricky, right?
Right, yeah.
Can you share a bit of the strategies there with Data Manager or with
Right,
Pinot?
so right now our SQL ingestion will use the time column for partitioning. So we would like to improve this to allow users to pick any columns for doing the partitioning. And then on top of this, we also have a way, so Pinot supports the upserts. So this will natively support the CDC streams. So in that way, we can also model the database updates as the CDC streams, and then we can use the upserts to make the data sync between those two. Yeah, so those two are two different ways that we would like to approach this. Yeah.
When you ingest data from Kafka, do you have support for schema registry, like different formats, Avro, Protobuf?
Yeah, yes we do. Yep. And then, so you'll see if you test out the product, when you set up your Kafka connection, you have the opportunity to specify a schema registry URL. Yeah, and we're able to pull the schemas from there. And so with that, we don't ask you to select whether it's like Avro or JSON. We have the schema already, so it makes it a little bit easier.
And, would it automatically create tables? Just like in Kafka connectors, you can also have a Hive integration that will create a Hive table for you. So similar kind of use case. Or you have to explicitly create your Pinot table.
Yeah, so we directly create the Pinot table from from the Kafka stream.
Okay.
Hey, thanks for the talk. I wanted to ask, to what degree are the upserts supported? So if you pull from MySQL, are upserts supported for like all segments, like including the historical ones, or just like real time only? Yeah,
so the current state of the upsert for Pinot is that it works for the real-time topics. So people need to prepare the CDC streams, and then we will be able to consume those events, and then it's going to update the rows based on the primary keys. And then in the future, what we want to add is to probably the batch upserts for offline tables. And we also want to add delete. Right now, we only support append and also updates. So we want to add the delete so that the data will be really in sync between the source and Pinot. Yeah.
Cool. Thank you.
Yep.
Hi, I had a question about the table validation. With my company, we don't use StarTree Cloud or Data Manager, and we have a problem with being able to statically validate both table configs and schemas at the same time, because you can't really reference a schema that doesn't exist yet in your table config. How does Data Manager handle this? Are you using the same kind of Pinot cluster API validate endpoints, or are you using something else?
Yep, yeah. So we do use the validate schema and validate table config endpoints that are available through the Pinot controller. We do have some additional validation that we have on the DM layer. But yeah, I would say the endpoints that are already available in Pinot OSS, this is kind of like our starting point for the validation.
All right, let's give our speakers a hand. Thank you everyone for being here.